How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yourself?
Good. Just working.
The first question would just be a little bit about you, your background, and why and when you started photography.
I'm originally from Miami, Florida. And I grew up in a very vibrant Caribbean community. I come from both Haitian and Dominican parents, and Miami is super Caribbean, um,
Yeah,
a really vibrant city. And so I grew up around that, right? But I
yeah,
also grew up around communities of color that their stories don't always make it into the media. And
okay.
if they make it into the media, it's told like in a very skewed way
Hmm.
that doesn't really show the reality of everyday life.
Yeah,
So the funny story is I was actually 12 years old, and my mom is a nurse. And so my mom didn't want me to go to the school in the neighborhood. She didn't think it was a great school.
okay.
So she goes to Walgreens. That's like Walgreens is like our drugstore,
Right.
right? And they're like little disposable cameras, the one that you can take a
Yeah.
picture, like it, yeah. So my mom goes and gets me like a $6 camera, and she's like, "Hey, I heard about this great art school that's like an hour away. Go in the neighborhood and take pictures." I had never had any training before then, and I looked up in that I grew up in this neighborhood, so they knew me since I was like 4 years old.
Right.
So I was able to go into people's houses, go into their businesses, take pictures of grandmothers cooking for their kids,
Yeah.
cab drivers, everybody. Um, and because they knew me, it wasn't posed.
Yeah.
It was just completely people being themselves. And so I presented this body of work to the school, and they had never seen Black Miami that way,
Yeah.
right? And so they completely loved the work. Um, and that was great. But really, what got me excited about it was, so I went back, I developed the pictures, and then I went back and passed it out to my neighbors. And seeing their reaction,
Yeah.
um, it was everything. It
Yeah.
was everything. And so that's what got me going.
That's such a it's a very unique, but it's such a nice story that it was like sort of your mum that got you started.
Yeah, my mom definitely got me started.
Yeah.
And it was all because she wanted me to go to a better school. And
Yeah.
so, like at the time she didn't have money to get me like a video camera
Mhm.
or like an easel with paint and everything. But she had like $6-7 to give me that disposable camera. So yeah, that's how, and it's so funny now because when she sees my work published in New York Magazine or
Yeah.
whatever, she's like, "This is so crazy. I would have never thought me making that decision to want to run to Walgreens would have led to all this."
I know.
So that's really nice.
That's it's amazing. It's also probably amazing for your mum to see as well. Like you say in the what was it, New York Times? Did you say?
Yeah, I've done New York Times, I've done New York Magazine, Vogue, um, let's see, BuzzFeed, Apple. I've done a few.
That's
I,
amazing.
I've done a lot. I don't remember them all, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So you mentioned school. So was that just to do photography, or was that something different that you went to school for?
No, so it was a school of the arts, but when I went to college, I actually majored in English literature with a
Right.
minor in sociology. Yeah, so I ended up becoming an English teacher, but
Okay.
I think, and like I served in the military and all kinds of cool stuff, but I think my love for literature and reading definitely shaped my work.
Right.
Because I think that when you read a lot, it helps you contextualize the word that you're looking at.
Yeah.
It helps you think about different things that you probably would have not thought about
Mhm.
if you didn't expose yourself to all kinds of literature. And I remember in college, I was a huge British lit fanatic,
Yeah.
right? So I loved Chaucer. and Jonathan Swift and all those cats. And I like them because I love their satire.
Right.
And I loved how they use literature to make a social commentary on society, right? And so besides the work of George Orwell and people like that, I didn't really see people making satire in American lit, or I just wasn't exposed to it. And so my work, what I hope is that it begins to make commentary on the social conditions that are happening in America through a Black lens.
Yeah, no, it is powerful stuff, and especially when I look at your, because my photography is completely different. I'm still learning, and I would love to get into that kind of line that you're in. Like my type's more landscape, so it's very sort of chilled. I go and just spend like an hour or two just picking the composition.
Right.
Whereas I feel the line of work that you're in, it must be quite like emotional type thing that because when I take a photo, I'm happy with it. But is there the type of photos that you're taking, you will be happy with them, but when you look back on them, because there's maybe emotion involved in them, do you feel that emotion, or do you have to separate yourself from that?
Yeah, so I don't separate myself from my work at all. Like I'm deeply emotionally involved in my work, right? So when I look back at the photographs, and it's not even only through Black Lives Matter, it's through the photographs that I've taken in Haiti and in Asia and different places like that. I'm so connected to it because I know, especially in the American context, that people of color don't really show up.
Yeah.
Right. And if they show up, like we show up in such a stereotypical way, like Black male thug, angry Black woman, hoodlum kids. You never really see Black kids laughing or smiling or like you don't see that every day. And so it's emotional for me because I feel like the people in my work reflect me.
Yep.
Right. And so like I'm behind the camera, so you don't see me.
Yeah.
But I hope that when you see these people, first I see myself in those people, but then I hope that the rest of the world can see themselves in those people as well. Because like even though I focus on Black life, the emotions there can be applied to anyone, irrespective of race or color, right? Like everyone feels angry sometimes. Everyone feels the weight of injustice. Everyone feels love, happiness, everything. So like, I really hope that like I show that the human experience in terms of emotions is like a universal one.
Yeah.
That like there's nothing significant about like for example, Black people expressing rage. Because other races express rage too. Exactly. So it's definitely emotional. For sure.
Yeah, because I've seen obviously through your Instagram, like there is that different types of emotion. It isn't just one thing, like you say. There's kids smiling. There's obviously your protests. Do you sort of have when you go out photographing, do you have something in mind that you want to capture, or is it just whatever is happening in front of you, you just photograph?
So it's funny, right? Like as a photographer, you may have it in your mind that you're going to cover one thing.
Yeah.
And then life happens. And then you're like, wait, this is not what I had planned. So sometimes I may have a specific idea, but things unfold in a different way. And sometimes they unfold exactly how I want them to unfold. But like, I'm not a technical photographer.
Yeah.
I'm a very instinctual photographer. So I actually shoot from the heart. Like whatever my eyes gravitate towards, that's what I photograph.
Yeah. And so obviously when you're out, let's take these protests, for instance, do you take a lot of gear with you, or is it literally just camera in hand and shoot what you see type thing.
Yeah, so I don't take a lot of gear.
Right.
And here, let me tell you why. So imagine you're in the middle of something that's super emotional for you, right? And then someone whips out this massive camera with a huge lens and they put it in your face. Right? Like most people are going to be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So, no, I pack super light. I carry my Sony. I definitely blend in with the crowd, right? I make sure that I get there early in terms of protests because I want to try to have a conversation with as many people as I can.
Okay.
So when they see me, they're not put off by me.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think sets my work apart from some other photographers, because a lot of my work, even in the protests, you see that I'm taking portraits in the protests. And it's because I have done the work to establish some kind of relationship.
That's good.
Before I started taking the picture. So I'm able to maneuver in the crowd and take photographs. But no, I pack light. And generally speaking, when you're covering civil unrest, you want to pack light because in some situations, not always, like the police can be rather violent.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the crowd gets very passionate and you don't want anything that's going to weigh you down.
Yeah.
You want to be able to run if you need to run. So yeah, I pack light.
Yeah.
One camera, one lens, and like a bottle of water.
Yeah, stay hydrated.
Exactly.
So I was actually going to ask, because I don't know about that kind of thing, about speaking to people, because I don't have to. When you take landscapes, you just shoot what's in front of you. But
right.
Do you always have to ask permission, like, to maybe take a photograph? Because does that then mean that person's maybe expecting, like, you to...
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So I sometimes ask permission depending on the situation. I have the conversation beforehand and let them know that I'm a photographer and I'll be taking pictures.
Yeah.
So they actually don't see me photographing them when I photograph them. So
Yeah.
it's not like in the middle of protest, I'm like, hey, stop, turn this way.
Yeah.
And so no, the thing is that, you know, like here in the States, you can take a picture of someone in a public space, right? The thing is, when you're taking photographs of people of color that have already these negative stereotypes about them, you have to choose what kind of narrative do you want to push, right? So there are certain photographs that will never see the light of day, because I think that it presents people in a negative light, both black and white, right? So like there are some images, like people have asked me, like, do you have images of people destroying stuff? And I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I think there are enough people that can show that.
Yeah.
But I'm really about like humanizing our experiences as people. So I don't want to show that. But no, you don't always have to ask for permission. I would say that it's a good rule of thumb if you can. But sometimes, you know, you're in a situation where it's just hard to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And how many other photographers would you say are out when you go to these things? Is there quite a lot of people that you're competing? Well, you're not competing, but you know.
Yeah. So in St. Louis, there were a few. There were a few. And even behind the scenes, like sometimes you're working alongside photographers that are fantastic.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you're working around some that, you know, kind of want to push and, hey, I need to get my shot and blah, blah, blah. And so in those situations, especially at protests, I'm always like, you know, there's a reason why right now in America, they're looking for the work of Black photographers. And it's because oftentimes when other groups coming to Black communities, they present them in a certain way.
Right.
And so they want something very authentic and very honest. So whenever I tell, you know, my colleagues that, they kind of just back up and they're like, okay. Yeah.
You've obviously done recently work with Gucci, and you've obviously mentioned other publications that you've done work with. that must be completely different. So what does that entail in that side of work?
Yeah, so I'm actually not a protest photographer at
Right.
all. It just so happened to be a historical moment that
Yeah.
was happening, and I captured it. So yeah, I recently worked with Gucci,
Right.
and part of the reason why Gucci brought me on for their latest release was because they appreciated my documentary style approach.
Right.
And quite honestly, the people that I look up to are people like, Gordon Parks, C.W. Griffin, Bruce Davidson, um, Maggie Stiber. There's a lot of just amazing documentary photographers
Right.
whose work that I love. And so they liked how I photographed. And so they ended up wanting me to come in and photograph for them that way. And it was a great experience. I've never shot fashion before. So shooting the runway, they call it shooting in the pit. So you're like with 15 other photographers. And mind you, like, even though I have a big personality, I'm actually only 5 feet tall, right? So I'm not I'm not a tall woman. And so they put me in the front, and I was shooting the runway, and that was cool.
Yeah.
But what I really enjoyed was shooting behind the scenes.
Right.
When you see the models getting ready and they're interacting with the makeup artists and things like that. So that was fun.
Yeah.
That was. But I think generally, when doing this work as a photographer, it's important to find your voice and find your style, and then you can apply it to whatever it is that you want to, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you want to do. But it's important to find your voice in your artistry.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's maybe something that I struggle with, and I don't know if it's just because I'm new to this and starting out, but when I look back at my photographs, yes, I'm happy with them, but sometimes there's not that emotional connection, and it's maybe more like a postcard type thing, that it's like, this is Scotland, like it looks pretty, or like whatever. I struggle to sort of get that connection, and I don't really know, does that just come with experience, or do you need to, like, do I need to study and like read more into other photographers to kind of be influenced more?
I would say it's a little bit of both, right?
Right.
So my mentor, C.W. Griffin, who worked with Gordon Parks, he started off shooting landscape.
Yeah.
So he was a huge like Ansel Adams fan, right? And I used to shoot street, but from a distance, because I was like really afraid of rejection or walking up to someone and them being like, no, I don't want you to take my picture, like stop being weird or something like that. So I would say it takes time, definitely. Look at the work of photographers who you like. Study them, but never lose yourself in studying them. Right? And it definitely takes experience, because part of the reason why people are comfortable with taking landscape, unless you're specifically that, is that the landscape can't really talk back in that way, right? Like they can't say no, they can't say, and you have time to sit there to compose the picture. And that's completely okay. And then eventually you may say, hey, I want to shoot some people. And in that case, what I began to do, honestly, was shoot my family and my friends. And then I began to shoot them. And then, like, until I got comfortable with, sometimes, like, even my mom, sometimes she's like, no, I don't feel like
leave me alone.
Right. And so eventually you get comfortable with that. But it's sometimes it's a process. Like for me, it was a total process. When people see that, how did you get so close? I was like, it's been like, years in the making. Yeah.
No, that does help, because I kind of look at the likes of your photography and people that are like documenting and going out and almost being so close to people, and you're always going to get that emotional connection because it's another human being. Whereas, like you say, when it is landscape, although it's living and moving, but it's not the same. I don't know. You kind of struggle to get that, and that's why I do want to try going out into even Edinburgh, like go out there and take photographs of people. Obviously, 2 meter distance just now, but it is definitely something that I want to try, and then if I don't like it, I'll just go back to landscape because I do like landscape.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would say be gentle and be patient with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a process, but also be open to trying it. So it's so awesome that you're even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why street worked for me for a little bit is because I was able to be in that environment without like having to walk up to people. And then eventually, like you're in the environment long enough, someone is going to become curious.
Yeah.
And then you may engage in conversation with
Yeah.
someone, and then you go from there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I feel like you're just teaching me, but so it's the only way I'm going to learn. And obviously that would lead on to you being a lecturer, because that is like another thing that I've seen on your Instagram. How did that come about, and is that something that you do regular?
Yeah, so I teach at the International Center of Photography in New York.
Right.
And the way that I actually landed that was I was doing a presentation at ICP. And so I told you my past life, I was an English teacher. So speaking and teaching comes very naturally to me. And the way that I presented, they really liked it. You know, I was able to engage with the students, ask questions, make jokes, like everything like that. And they loved it. And so they asked would I be interested in teaching a class. So I'm actually going on my 3rd semester with them teaching. And the course that I'm teaching right now is the Intersectionality of Documentary Photography.
Right.
So that course talks about how do you look at race or gender or class or socioeconomic position, sexual orientation, and how do you look at that in relation to your subject, right? And how do you present your subject in a way that's as authentic and as dignified as possible? So if you're photographing a trans woman or a trans man, how do you photograph them? How do you approach them, right? How do you talk to them? If you're photographing, let's say, a white conservative male, how do you approach that?
Yeah.
And there are ways to approach people that is respectful of all those parts of their identity that can produce very beautiful photographs.
Yeah.
The other thing it does is, or the class does, hopefully, is it checks your position, right? And the photograph, like, I mean, the class, everyone that I've taught has told me that the class made them very uncomfortable, but they learned a lot.
Yeah.
Because there are things that they didn't think about that really challenge them, right? So like one of the biggest things that I know really affected some of the students was, okay, so when you think about, let's say, Black women in America, right? The first thing they often say is, oh my God, they're a minority group. They're disadvantaged. Many of them may be poor, right? They may not be educated, and all those things.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I always say, so how about what if I don't view myself as a disadvantaged person, right? What if that's someone else's idea that they're placing on me, right? And so then it makes you think about, well, what ideas am I putting on someone that they don't have of themselves, right? Because I don't move through the world feeling like I'm a disadvantaged person. Or I don't move through the world feeling like, oh my God, definitely there's no getting around it in America. There's racism, there's prejudice, all that stuff is true. but I don't view myself as someone that is less than because I'm Black.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
So when you don't think of it that way, it forces you to really ask someone, how do you view yourself in this space? Because I think as photographers, we think about the visual aspect.
Yeah.
But in order to make profound photographs, you need for that person to come through in your photograph, not your idea of that person to come through.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, so they really, really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's and that's the thing that I think maybe a lot of people don't understand is that not one person is the same. So it's kind of, you need to, like you say, know how to approach certain people. And like I would probably think like your students, to be fair, in ways.
Yeah.
It's just human nature, really. So that's good that obviously you're teaching that, and it's good to get them out of their comfort zone as well. And that's kind of what I'm trying with a lot of stuff as well. And that's why I want to try maybe some street photography or documenting, or even film, something like that, just to, because you don't know, I might be good at it, I might not. You just
but try it, experiment. You know what? Here's the other thing too. Like, think about something that you really like or that you're passionate about, right? So you talked about football. Yeah. I'm from the Caribbean. Football is a thing. Like, we love soccer. It is absolutely bananas. Like right now I'm in Miami, and 2 blocks from my house, there's soccer going on right now, right? So if you love soccer, for instance, you can begin to document your buddies. Or, you know, like go out where you're in Ireland, right? So
Scotland.
Okay, so it's close. Okay, so you may go out to, you know, your neighborhood park or whatever, and you go document that. And then in that, you can then begin to like get more personal shots, right? Not only of the footballers kicking the ball, you may see them go aside, they're wiping their brow, and you get like the sweat and all that other stuff. You get the camaraderie, them being together. And so then that can open the door to other things, because you may be photographing this footballer, and then you build a relationship, and then you may end up photographing intimate parts of him and his family, or her and her family, right? So like, I would always say go with what you're passionate about, and then that will begin to open the doors because you naturally like it anyway.
Yeah, no, that's quite. I've never thought of that, to be honest. I did think of like sports photography just like right in the beginning, but then not having the right equipment. Like, I don't have a telephoto lens. For obviously if I was at a game or something, that you probably need something like that to get up close. But yeah, that's quite interesting.
Well, here's the thing. Like, people always think they need a lot of gear. Right. That is actually not true. Right. And so unless it's like a crazy competitive pack sport, like here in Miami, guys just go play football. Yeah. Right. So like, let's say if it's your buddies, you may not necessarily need anything long. You may be able to get on the field. Definitely don't get in their way, right? But you may be able to shoot a few things, and then go from there. Yeah. But I would always say, like, start with something that is close to your heart, because you don't want a situation where, like, let's say you're shooting street, and then you're like, man, this is hard. Man, like, you want something that you're naturally invested in. Yeah.
No, that's good advice. I'll take that on board, and you never know, I might try it.
Try it just for your own fun.
Exactly, totally. So going back to you, what do you most like photographing? Like, out of all the things that you photograph, what is your go-to that you love photographing?
So like, I really, really like humanist style photography. So I think his name is Eugene Smith. Right. Or Eugene Grant. He's a humanist photography, and what he does is he photographs the human conditions of everyday life. And the reason why that's my go-to is because I think that life is moving art. And so you're going to be able to capture minor moments that most people would overlook that photographically is beautiful. So that's what I gravitate towards the most, like everyday living. But everyday living that people look over. Because I want you to stop and look and be like, oh, wow. Like, I remember bathing my kids, or I remember like even today, actually, my son, he's 6 years old. He decided to grab a water hose and bathe in my backyard. Right? And so I grabbed my camera and the photographs came out great, and I'll probably share them sometime. But those things. Things,
so just everyday life, pretty much.
Definitely. And because when you do that, you never run out of things. Right. And then also when you do that, from having those kinds of photographs, you can begin to build projects. So let's say if you're photographing, I don't know, various people going to church, or people being at church. And then you can begin to explore like the relationship between religion and something else through these photographs. So you're building a body of work without giving yourself the pressure of, oh my God, I got to come up with this project. So it keeps me busy because I shoot almost every day.
Yeah. So that is literally so is that your job, just going out?
I'm a full-time photographer.
Yeah.
And so people ask, how do I survive, right? So I survive off of commissions, grants, assignments, jobs. I stay really busy. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm actually a working photographer. So I'm always working. The other thing too is, like just in terms of practicality, like I live within my means, and I make sure I live really comfortably. So it works for me.
No, that sounds perfect, to be honest.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So if you don't mind me asking, what sort of future projects have you got in the pipeline? Are you allowed to reveal anything?
So right now I'm currently working on a project in the Mississippi Delta. And so the Mississippi Delta is a part of America that is drenched with, like racism and all that other stuff. But so I'm a prior veteran, like I told you, I served in the U.S. Army. And a friend of mine, his grandfather actually owns a piece of land that his family used to be slaves on. And so his name is Roosevelt Davenport. Beautiful man, right? Like he's like 84. He has 22 children. And he raised his children picking cotton, right? And so he used to be a sharecropper, and a sharecropper is basically someone that was a farmer. They used to farm the land of a white person, and then they would split the profit. But sometimes the white person would come up with let's say between me and James, like, let's say I'm like, all right, you owe me $20. And then when you come and pay me $20, I'm like, nah, you owe me $25. Right? So that used to happen a lot. And he managed to survive and raise his children and all these other things. And it's just this amazing story about this man who grew up in that kind of situation and now owns the land that, his family.
Amazing.
No, it's beautiful. And it really, again, like, because when I went to Mississippi, me being from Miami, I had my own preconceived notions. And I asked him, I was like, why would you live in Mississippi, right? Like, you can go anywhere in America to get away from this craziness. And he said to me, he was like, times may have been hard, but my life is good. And it really, like, I had to check myself, because even though I'm teaching that course, I came with my own ideas about what, life is like in Mississippi. And then I get there, and the family is so loving and they're so close together, and they cook out every day. So there's always food and everybody's always laughing, and there's babies everywhere. And it was just awesome. It was so like it, because like at first I was like, oh man, I feel so bad for him.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get there and you can't feel bad for him. Like he's a man full of pride and dignity, and it changes your outlook for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
It's almost, well, I'm sure he probably doesn't say that it's the perfect story, but it kind of has that sort of ring to it, that he's been through all of that struggle to then now he says he's happy, like type thing. It's
Yeah.
it must have been tough. Like,
oh, for sure. And it makes you think about what does it take for one to be happy?
yeah.
Right. And just the definitions that we put on life.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know what it's like in Scotland, but in America, it's all about bigger and better, right? So getting a bigger house, bigger car, more money, this, and that. And then you get all those things, and then you reach his age and you realize it meant nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so seeing him, he's not a wealthy man,
mm-hmm.
but in terms of the love he has in his life, I mean, imagine if you have 22 kids, you have like 1,000 grandchildren, right? Yeah. And like the grandkids love him. No, it's true. And so like, I remember being at his house and grandkids are running in and out and they're just hugging him and kissing him all day long.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. Because when you reach 84, like that's totally what you want.
I know. It is. It's almost like once you strip everything back, like family is the most important thing. And obviously he has that, and like you say, there's obviously a lot of them. But
no, it's beautiful, I think. I think it's beautiful.
So how long did you spend with him, or have you still to do that? Sorry.
Yeah, so initially I spent 2 weeks with him, and then I'll be going back when the cotton, because when I went, you couldn't see the cotton in the fields. Right. So the cotton starts growing, I believe they start growing in July. So I'm going to go out there in August when you see like the white fields of the cotton, and maybe spend another like 3 weeks with him, just photographing him and his family.
That's amazing. That sounds like the dream.
I'm definitely fortunate. I think that, photography is it's like a lifelong work, right? It's like, it's soul work. That's what I call it. And so you have to find the thing that speaks to you, because not all the time you're going to get accolades. Not all the time you're going to get published. And so you have to do the work, irregardless of what's happening around.
Yeah. This might be a tough question, but when you go away for 2-3 weeks at a time, you must miss your family. So do you sort of FaceTime them most nights, speak to them most nights to kind of, because I've only got a partner just now, but we've got a baby on the way, and it's kind of, I couldn't imagine, because I've never really done it, to be honest, but I couldn't imagine being away for 2-3 weeks at a time. And I know it's work, but it must be difficult in ways.
So here's the thing. Honestly, James, I bring them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wrap that question.
No, I mean, there are times where I can't bring them, right?
Right, yeah.
But if I'm staying for a longer time, I'll fly them in. So like my son has been everywhere. My partner has been everywhere.
Yeah.
And because I think that it's important that they hear these stories too.
Yeah.
And they experience it and they learn from it. So yeah, and comparable to you, like I can't imagine being away from my family that long. Yeah. So if I can, unless it's like a specific assignment, and I don't have the space for them, then they stay back. But for the most part, like I was recently in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis, you know, that's the place where the George Floyd killing happened. It's also the place where Dante Wright, the 20-year-old kid, got killed by the police. And so I was there for Dante Wright's funeral and documenting that. And so my family came. And so that's something, I have a lot of work around that stuff. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it yet. I think, like, when you're talking about emotion, this is something that you may experience, right? Like, you may get very emotionally involved in something. It's going to be super important to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And like, I really, really messed up with that, right? Like, I was, like, when the protests started, James, I was in the streets every single day, every day, because I was just like, oh my God, this is insane. And I have to make sure that I tell this story, right?
Yeah.
And then because, like, I'm looking at all these Black people in the streets. I'm looking at white allies in the streets. And it makes me think of, my friends who are white and Black. I see like people that look like my son, people that look like my sister, people who look like my best friend who is a white girl from Philly. Like, and it's so personal. And, like I found myself emotionally withdrawing because it was just too much and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so when you're doing this kind of emotional work, it's going to be hard to separate yourself from it. But it's important to try to, and then find other ways to decompress. Yeah.
You're right. It's something that I almost feel like you probably needed to do, because those things you need to keep them at the forefront of people's minds, and a lot of the time I think if it's not yourself documenting it, then who is? So you almost feel that responsibility to go out, like you say, every night, but then it then becomes personal, like you're saying. So it's kind of, put it this way, I think I wouldn't like to be in that position, but you have to do it. It's as simple as that. It's kind of thing that you need to talk about. And I know my hat's off to you, because over here there's nothing that, like where I stay, there's nothing like that goes on. I don't have to go outside and see anything like that. So I'm only seeing it from the likes of you that are putting stuff out. So it's important for the likes of me to be as educated as I can on things like that. So no, I'm very grateful that there's people like you out there that are documenting and photographing those moments.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Because it is, and obviously there was a little bit of justice, I suppose. Was it last week? Or
yeah, you know what? It was like justice, and then a slap in the face, right? So imagine Derek Chauvin is guilty on everything, and then the next 2 days later, you have to bury Dante Wright. And then right before Derek Chauvin gets convicted, an hour before that, they killed a Black girl who was 15 years old. And then the other day, they killed a Black man in North Carolina. And then they shot a Black man 10 times in Virginia. And all that has happened this week. Right? So it's just like...
You know, and that... the thing that I struggle with is, was he only... because that was such a high profile and worldwide sort of arrest, is that why that was sort of given in a way, that the likes of those ones that you've just mentioned, what's going to happen to all of those? Like, that's the thing that like struggle with, and I know yourself and that struggle a lot worse than what I'm struggling with, but I just, when I'm looking at things like that, it's kind of, is that the only reason that's why he got those years?
Yeah.
But,
No, I mean, I struggle with the same question.
yeah,
The same question that you're asking. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen to the other police officers, right? Most of the time in America, they get off.
yeah,
So it's very, I think it's very scary.
mhm,
It's scary. And the thing is, like, it happens so much. So even as a photographer, you reach a point where you don't want to cover it anymore because it's so painful.
yeah,
And it's nonstop, right? It's not like this happened and then maybe a year from now, it's like, okay, Monday, then Tuesday, then Thursday, then Saturday. And it's just like, look,
I know,
I can't keep doing this.
I know.
Yeah.
It's it is difficult, and I appreciate you talking about it. And I wasn't sure if it would have went to that sort of conversation, but sometimes you just have to talk about these things, and I appreciate you opening up about that kind of thing, because it needs to be talked about, but at the same time, it's not nice to talk about.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult,
100%.
and I know, like, for myself, like, my son is 6 years old. And like I said, like, I have a very, very diverse group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
I have a buddy, Chris, who literally looks just like you. No, he does. And my son calls him Uncle Chris,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like, he doesn't have a concept of Uncle Chris is a white man,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something that's scary. You know what I mean? Like, it's just Uncle Chris, and
100%. Yeah.
and so, like, like, Uncle Chris and his kids, they come to my house, they spend the night, like, he treats them like they're cousins, and it's not, so, like, that's something that I'm afraid of, right? Like, what happens when one day I have to tell him, listen,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be careful, you
Yeah.
have to, if you see the cops, and I dread that.
I know, and like I say, I'm so lucky, and I know there's a lot of people over in America that are lucky as well, that you don't have to worry about things like that, but it's just something that people do have to worry about. There's no getting around it, really. It's just, you hope some way that it changes, and for however many years, like 400, 500 years that these sort of things have been happening, is it going to change in the next 1-2 years? Like, no. So it's not even
Probably
changed
not.
in a week.
Yeah,
Like,
let's just be honest.
I
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so it's the least that people can do is know about it, and be educated on it, and people documenting it and putting it out there, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So when you sort of put your photos up on Instagram and things, or let's say at the end of your photographing career, whenever that is, whether you're 90, what do you want people to take from your photographs, and like, what's your reasoning for photography?
Wow, that is such a good question. Um, so let's say when I'm old and 90,
20 kids.
I know, right? With all the grandbabies. um, I will hope that people say that I have documented the beautiful complexities of life for Black people,
Yeah.
and I have humanized our experiences to each other. I hope that they will always be able to see pieces of themselves in the work, and for it to be photographs that it doesn't matter where you are on this planet, they're able to relate to somehow.
Yeah. It's a good answer, and I can already see from your photographs that people can already take that just now. So I'd imagine that in 50 years when you look back, there'll be plenty more photos to look back on.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end, and the last question that I've asked everyone is, if you could take one last photograph ever, what would it be?
Jeez. If I can take one last photograph. So actually, if I can take one last photograph, it would probably be children playing at a playground before they realize that there's anything different. So it would be white babies, black babies, Asian babies, all the babies
Yeah.
playing together,
Yep.
and just having a joyous moment before society begins to impose ideas on them.
Yeah.
Because I think the children are our biggest teachers.
100%. It's
Yeah.
they know a lot more than I think people think they know.
I agree.
It's and it's like what you're saying there. When you're a kid, you're not kind of you're not born a racist or any sort of way. You are just living your best life, and it doesn't matter who is around you, and it's whatever we've talked about previous. That is all taught. I don't care what anyone says. It's all taught, and I think that photograph that you're talking about is definitely more about the emotion than sort of the composition or whatever. It's trying to capture that emotion in a photo, and
Exactly that.
I think it's the perfect answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that children remind us to laugh,
Yeah,
and they remind us that life is literally all about that, right? And
100%.
everything else is stuff that we have bought into.
Yep, agree.
Yeah.
So now, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, James.